the number one thing that I tell leaders when I'm talking about the importance of commercialization is make sure it is properly budgeted for in your business case before you make a go, no-go decision. And that budget needs to include different in-kind capabilities for sales and for marketing. Do not try to do this with the people you have, please.
Hello and welcome to the show, in an episode where we revisit the topic of productization and ask ourselves, now that we've productized, how do we commercialize? But before we talk about that, I obviously need to remind you to head over to onenightinproduct.com, where you can check out all my past episodes or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app, or find the podcast in glorious Technicolor on YouTube. And make sure you share it with all your friends so you and they never miss another episode again. On tonight's episode, we ask ourselves, what are the key elements of commercializing productized offerings when you're moving away from a services mindset? Can you do it with the same people you had before, or do you have to find new ones? And how can you even find new ones if you don't know what to look for? And how can product-minded people survive and thrive in organizations where it feels like the entire company is against them? For all this and much more, stick with us on One Night in Product. So my guest tonight is Eisha Armstrong. Aisha's the co-founder of Vecteris and has recently upgraded from hiking up mountains to climbing the damn things. But between expeditions, she finds time to work, helping service companies to peak success through productization. Now, I've spoken to Aisha twice on this podcast already, but she keeps writing new books so she can get invited back on. She's here tonight to talk all about her latest book, Commercialize, How to Monetize, Sell and Market Productized Offerings in B2B Professional Services. Hi, Aisha. How are you doing tonight?
I'm wonderful, Jason. Thanks so much for having me.
It's good to have you back. I'm looking forward to seeing who, by the end of this thing, is going to be like the person that's been on the most. So if you keep writing books, you never know. You could be the one.
Awesome.
Not sure what the prize would be. So, as mentioned, you're back again and you're on video this time. But before we get started, I do have to ask you, what is this mountaineering talk? I mean, the last we spoke, you were hiking up the things, but how did you get into the actual climbing of them now?
Well, it was my younger brother's idea. So I turned 50 this past year, and he knew...
Congratulations.
Thank you. He knew that I'd really enjoyed hiking up Mount Kilimanjaro. And he lives in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle, where they have lots and lots of mountains with glaciers on top. And he said, how about we do a more technical climb together? And it will be my birthday present to you. And I thought, what a wonderful idea. First of all, like so considerate and so sweet that he wants to spend time with me. And so we did some research and we decided to climb Mount Baker, which is north of Seattle, about 2 hours north in the North Cascades, and a little shy of 11,000 feet. But you are hiking on glacier to summit, so it's more technical.
Nice. So I'm assuming you've got all your sort of ice axes and crampons and all of those bits. It's definitely an interesting thing that I'm absolutely never going to be able to do at all at any point in my life because I'm far too unfit for that kind of thing.
Well, I definitely had to train. So I started training about 9 months ahead of time, and they actually recommended that you be able to do a pull-up, or at least several pull-ups.
Oh, yeesh.
Yeah, because if you do have to self-arrest with an ice axe, you want to be able to pull yourself up. So I could not do a pull-up when I started the training. Now I can do several pull-ups. And the equipment wasn't that hard. So we went with a group where they taught you before you actually do your summit day how to do everything and use all of it. But yeah, the physical fitness, that was about a 9-month effort to get in shape for that.
Well, there you go. Inspirational to us all. But let's get back to sea level and talk about your new book. So before we talk about the book, I mean, as mentioned, you've written a few. How come it was already time to do another book? Because you seem to be getting through these at quite a clip.
Yeah. So we kept hearing in the market with our clients how they were really struggling with going to market or commercializing the new products that they were developing and asking for our advice on how best do you price, how best do you package, what type of marketing should you put in place, who should be doing the selling. So we wanted to do some research so we could have some good answers for them. So it was very, very market driven.
Well, fair enough. Well, it's the hallmark of the best service companies to start to deliver the services, as they come up. But it's interesting because we've gone through Productize, all about transforming a service organization into a product one. We've gone through Fearless, which is about the leadership mindset and the culture that you need to develop to do just that. But now we're talking about commercializing. So very specifically, I mean, I can probably guess, and I don't need to guess, I've read the book, but what's the value prop for the new book specifically?
Yeah. So there are a couple of things. The first one is we tried to provide a very clear step-by-step roadmap on what do services companies, so companies where they've been going to market with services, what changes do they have to make in their go-to-market motions to go to market with a more productized or packaged offering? And we go through everything from how do you select the best target markets, how do you price, package, marketing, sales, and even how do you renew if you have a renewable packaged offering or renewable product. So that's one part is this step-by-step roadmap. And then the second thing is like the previous books that we've written, we have a lot of stories and case studies of real life examples of B2B services firms who went through this transformation and both the pitfalls that they faced, kind of the mistakes they made along the way, and then how they course corrected. So we really try to ground it in real life experience so people can see themselves, put themselves in the shoes of the people who've gone before them and hopefully get hope that they can do it too.
Well, fingers crossed. But when we're talking about they, who is the specific target audience for this book? I mean, is it the same people that read the last one, like the leaders or the people, the product people on the ground? Is it some different people, maybe in the marketing or the sales team or all of the above? Like, who's the ideal person that should pick this book up and go through it?
I would say all of the above. So certainly CEO, COO of a B2B services organization who's trying to use the strategy of productization to grow. That would be the first audience. The second would be a product leader or product manager who is trying to either develop the commercialization strategy of a new product or work hand in hand with sales and marketing to develop a commercialization strategy. And then the last audience, one that we haven't spoken to before, would be that sales leader, that chief marketing officer, again, at a B2B services organization who's getting these new products and wishing that perhaps they had been brought in earlier in the process so that they could be more successful in taking them to market.
But one thing that I'm very sure that you and I have spoken about before is how some of these problems are not actually specific to productizing service companies, but in some cases, they kind of apply to kind of non-tech, industry expert, founder type sort of product companies, but not really, but kind of, but not, they never call themselves a service company either. Do you think
Right.
there's something in here for those people too, like something that can maybe give them some inspiration to think about how they go to market differently as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, one of the things that we found in our research is there's a lot of literature out there about how do you do sales and marketing well. So, either sales methodologies, best practices in marketing, there's a wealth of information out there about that. There's also a wealth of information about how do you go to market with new tech products, specifically written more for kind of startups or intrapreneurs. But there's not a lot about when you don't have an organization that has gone to market with more packaged, productized, tech enabled solutions in the past, how do you evolve your commercialization capabilities to also commercialize a more productized offering, a more tech enabled offering?
Now that sounds great and kind of tops the trilogy off nicely, you know, almost like the Return of the Jedi of the productization pathway, right? And I presume, though, that you talked a little bit about how you've kind of gone back and done some more research, done some more case studies, done a lot more kind of thinking around the problem to try and understand like how to solve it. So through that process, and I guess even before that, through kind of the process of researching and then talking about the previous books as well, have you actually kind of worked out or changed your position on anything? Like, has anything surprised you that maybe you didn't know when you started all this stuff? Because I kind of feels like you've got the whole everything from sort of start to finish wrapped up in a way. But did anything change on the way?
Yeah, I think certainly one of the things that we realized is when we first talked about the productized pathway in the first book, which for those people who aren't familiar is a step-by-step approach from kind of developing your vision for productization all the way to continuing to iterate and improve on a product. We positioned the launch phase, the go-to-market phase, as something that happens after you develop a product. Now, certainly when you're doing market discovery, you're getting a lot of information about the needs of your market. What might be the best target market? How do they buy? What's their willingness to pay? All sorts of things that should go into your go to market strategy. But we weren't making it clear that your go to market strategy, your commercialization strategy happens before product development. Before you make that go, no go decision to write the first check to a developer to start to develop it, you should have a hypothesis of who are we selling to? What's the value prop? How much might they pay for this? How are we going to sell it? What is the customer acquisition cost likely to be? All of that needs to be in the business case before making a go, no go decision on development. We did not make that clear earlier.
Nah, but whatever happened to fake it before you make it, right? Like that's the thing that everyone's always dreaming about. You look at the lean startup and all these other entrepreneurs talking online. It's all about, let's just build it and they will come. Is that something that you just think doesn't work either at all or specifically for productizing service companies?
I think if you're too cavalier about it, it's not going to work. So you don't have to have 100% confidence in your hypothesis, but you at least have to have a hypothesis that maybe is grounded in a week or two of research, Jason. And you would be surprised. Again, we were having a lot of organizations come to us and say, we're really struggling with with how do we market this? How do we sell this? And then we'd ask them, like, well, was your assumption all along that your doer sellers were now going to sell a software product? And the answer is yes. It's like, whoa, why did you make that assumption? Like that that's something that should have changed in your upfront business case. And so just like the thought is not there and maybe a little bit of validation is not there. It doesn't have to take a long time, but it does need to happen.
But do you think then it's important for them to use that kind of thinking and research and all of the talking that they're going to be doing around that kind of initial discovery phase for the go-to-market side to maybe even inform what the product is that they even take out there in the first place? Because again, like you're talking, and we've talked before about this idea about, well, how to productize a tool, but like it almost feels like there's this kind of loop of like, well, maybe we need to tweak it now. Oh, now what impact does that have on the go-to-market? Okay, now what impact does that have on the product? Is it this kind of reinforcing loop that eventually kind of solidifies? Is that kind of how you see it?
Yeah, I love that infinity image. It keeps going back and forth. And honestly, Jason, where that showed up the most in the research was in those offerings, productized offerings, that there was an assumption that they would renew across time. Because renewability is something that has to be designed into a product so that they're not getting all of the value right up front, so that they get more value the more they use it. And again, you'd be surprised at how many organizations go to market with something they say is renewable, but hasn't been designed for renewability. Yeah.
But this is funny. I want to come back to the renewability thing, the kind of recurring nature of products in a little bit, because that is crucially important. But I want to touch a little bit on something that kind of goes around that loop that we just talked about, which is really the idea that there needs to be a strategy. Near the end of the book, you say that product strategy is the heart of successful commercialization. And I think, that's a very important point. I'm going to talk about way up front because, it's almost like that kind of precursor. And it feels important because so many companies, even if they're not service companies, they don't really seem to have a product strategy in the first place. Like there's all these discussions about what a strategy is and isn't and who should be creating it and all of those things. But some companies just seem to be going very opportunistically into wherever because, they just see some opportunities, they go after them. So from your perspective, what are some of the hallmarks of a successful product strategy in this context and what should they be looking for as part of that?
Yeah. So we look for 5 things. So the first one is a very clear understanding of the market, which includes who are you selling to? Why? What are their needs by segment? Do you have the capabilities to reach that segment or segments? So, kind of a thorough understanding of the market is the first hallmark of a good commercialization strategy. The second one is how are we going to make money? So, monetization, which includes both the pricing and the packaging. And honestly, we talk about packaging first and then we talk about pricing. So, what's the business model that makes this attractive, both for your customers and for you in order to develop it? Third hallmark, Jason, is marketing. So can you develop compelling messaging, communicate those using different channels, really to generate the volume of leads that you need to meet your revenue targets? Sales is number 4. So again, do you have the sales channel and process to effectively sell the new product? And this is one that trips a lot of organizations up because they typically do have a sales channel already in place, but it's optimized to sell services, not products. And it's very, very difficult to transform a services sales channel into a product sales channel. So again, you'd be surprised how many people try unsuccessfully. And then the last one is that renewability. So have you planned for product renewability, account growth, and so on? So those are the 5 things we look for a successful commercialization strategy.
Well, that's lucky because I've got some questions about some of these things as well, having gone through the book a little bit, but also based on some of my own past PTSD from certain organizations as well. But a big part of go-to-market, you touched on it yourself, is this kind of like the market itself. And obviously in some cases, it feels like companies are going after markets, too many markets all at the same time. But like ultimately you have to choose someone to sell to. But it feels like a problem that many organizations that maybe don't have strong targeting and also do have like a pre-existing book of business of service people that they're selling to, is that they probably just try and sell to them because they're the ones that they've already got like in their little Rolodex. They're the ones that they can go out and reach out to. They can try and foist products onto them even if they don't want it. Is that something that is like the most common way that companies tend to try to do this? Or is there, do you feel that, or do you see that a lot of companies doing some of that thoughtful work up front to actually define a proper kind of ideal customer profile?
Well, so I want to answer that 2 ways. So yes, I do see people kind of rushing too quickly to just assume without doing the proper upfront work. That said, based on both our research and our experience, for a traditional B2B services company to productize, the most effective strategy by far is to sell to your existing customers and sell it as a bundle so that you're selling them products with your services, either explicitly or implicitly. And we tell a great story of a company we've loved working with, Mercer, a large global HR consulting firm, about how they did this with their Skills Edge solution, which is a bundle of both advisory services on how do you take a more skills approach to compensation, benefits, talent development versus like a jobs approach. And they've taken those services and then added in data and technology. And they bundled those together because they saw a need with their existing clients to not just receive the services, but also have the ongoing data and technology to help facilitate the transformation to a more skills-based approach. Now, it wasn't without challenges to do that. And they certainly had to take time to understand how do they do this most effectively with their current customer base. But that is the most effective strategy, rather than what we see a lot of organizations do, which is try to go to a completely different market, like usually down market, right? So we're going to sell a more productized, standardized, cheaper thing down market to a more price sensitive customer base. That's hard to do because you don't have any brand recognition with them. You don't have relationships. You don't have a sales channel designed for that lower customer acquisition cost. And we tell a story about, we had a pseudonym, the company. Talent Tether is a large outplacement firm who tried to do that. It took them 5 years to get it right. Much, much harder to do.
Did they get it right in the end, though?
They did, but not without a lot of bumps and bruises. And thankfully, their executives were very candid with us about those bumps and bruises and the changes they had to make along the way and the significant investments they had to make in new capabilities in order to sell something at a lower price down market.
It's funny though, because I've certainly worked in the past on products that did have a service component, and you sit there and like you've got this kind of almost a problem or disconnect in this idea of like, well, we've been selling you a service which is very human curated and obviously has a certain level of quality associated with it, because if there's anything wrong with it, the person that's doing it fixes it before it goes out. And then you try and sell them into this kind of more automated kind of ongoing product that they can, look in over time, which is brilliant because they can do that, don't have to keep paying. But at the same time, the quality dips because they've not got this consultant able to smooth the rough edges off. So do you feel that there is, or that there are any kind of key watch outs where people are trying to take people from one place to another place and actually maintain that kind of, I guess, brand or kind of quality equity with them so that they actually still trust them as a supplier and don't think, oh God, well, now we're seeing actually under the hood and it's not half as good as it was when we actually got the report. So are they kind of making it up for us?
So, Jason, it's interesting you bring that up because that is an objection I hear very frequently from service professionals who don't want to sell the products to their service customers. The data actually does not say that is a significant problem. The significant problem is how do you create something that's very easy to sell because you're still selling it through your service professionals for them to sell alongside the services? Or how do you convince your services professionals who are doing the selling that there's budget room, that they actually can go back to that client and ask for more money for the products and they don't just give the products away for free? So those are where the data shows the real challenges are. It's less that there's a quality degradation and that the customer is dissatisfied with the product experience. That's a false objection, though, that I hear a lot from services professionals who don't want to sell products alongside services.
Just stick to what you know.
Yeah.
But one of the things you call out in the book is around renewability. You talked about it earlier as well, this idea that moving away from that kind of consultant-led point-in-time solution and giving people something they can subscribe to, something they can come back to and basically look after themselves. But you also say it's very common for service companies to kind of almost build churn into their service offerings because they can then charge again next time for another engagement versus, just kind of sitting there and watching the money roll in. So how important is it, and I guess also how easy is it to get away, if you've got that mindset, to get away from that one and done deliverable mindset and get much closer to this idea of, well, we've got to build something that people can keep coming back to and keep paying for?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things that we found in our research is that the companies that do this really well have gotten away from talking about kind of annual revenue and more about customer lifetime value, and really have refocused all of their goaling, their conversations around that idea of customer lifetime value, and are willing to make the investment to trade off perhaps some revenue in the short term for that longer customer lifetime value. Now, to be clear, Jason, this is not a switch that you just flip. It takes time, several years usually, to migrate expectations away from shorter term measures to longer term measures, but it can be done.
But what I've seen in some situations is where they try to do that. And you have this idea of, well, look, this is the strategy. We're going to go for the recurring stuff. We're going to go for customer lifetime value. But at the same time, they still put quarterly targets on salespeople or account teams or whatever to make sure. And if they don't hit those numbers, then they're in trouble, which then obviously leads to some internal tension because then all of a sudden you've got this almost battle between the two sides within the company, even though the actual strategy is clear. So have you kind of found any tactics or strategies to try and get people away from that? Because it feels like if you're in that sort of situation, you're automatically sort of on shaky ground, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And so there are lots of resources out there on sales compensation models, and we didn't want to replicate those. But we did want to talk about things that we see work when you're in this tricky situation of selling products alongside services. And you're traditionally a services organization that's focused perhaps more on short-term revenue. The other thing that's tricky is that usually services revenue is going to be greater initially than product revenue, where you've got a lower price point typically, but again, longer customer lifetime value. So there are a couple different things that we saw organizations do well. One was that they have separate teams so that they still have people who have services revenue. They're incented, the traditional way, focused on near-term revenue, perhaps some profitability. This is an interesting one that's coming into play now with generative AI that I can go into. But then you have a separate team where they're focused more on customer lifetime value. So you keep the teams separate. Now, When you have separate teams, there's their own set of challenges. So you have to navigate through those, but that is one way to at least get some focus on customer lifetime value. The other thing is to change the compensation structure so that you're not just compensating your traditional team on short-term revenue, but perhaps they have sweeteners, for example, for those sales where there's a more productized approach and the near-term revenue is going to be lower, but the longer customer lifetime value is going to be higher. There's also differences in terms of not only how people are compensated, but also another thing that came up in the research is how people are promoted and how their performance is assessed, especially in those services firms where you still have a partner-based model where near-term revenue is the threshold for making partner or not.
Yeah, there's that whole thing around it's hard to get people to change their behaviors if you're incenting them to do something completely different, right? So it's interesting though, because this kind of idea of changing compensation models away from the more traditional sales compensation models and quarterly targets and making a quota, it keeps coming up in various conversations, obviously with yourself and with others out there and about, but it still feels that the vast majority of people, again, even in product organizations that have never touched services in their lives, that quarterly targets still reign supreme. Do you think that's something that's changing from what you've seen, or do you think that's still by far the biggest thing that you see out there?
It is still the biggest thing that I see out there, absolutely. And that's why I used earlier the word investment carefully or deliberately. Because when I am talking to a professional services firm leader, CEO, managing partner, I have to make it clear that there is going to be probably a hit near term if you are trying to replace some of your services revenue with product revenue. If you're adding to it and you've found a way to maintain the services revenue, then it's just additive. But there needs to be an investment mindset that this is going to take a couple of years to truly realize the return. And this is not something you're going to see in year one.
Yeah, it kind of then makes me think back to kind of Fearless and the discussions about culture and almost holding your nerve as well, rather than kind of the first time you see a bump in the road, immediately saying, well, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. We'll just go back to what we know. Because it kind of feels like there's always that, danger is maybe the stupid word to use in this sort of scenario, because, if someone's waving loads of money at you, you might sit there and think, well, money's good, right? But there is that kind of danger that no matter, best intentions and all that, but that ultimately if someone comes and says, well, look, we're going to wave $1 million at you for such and such, that's going to just blow this whole strategy up. Is that something that you see happen in companies that you work with, or are they, by the time they're working with you, are they fairly kind of on the path and they're kind of able to sort of stay the course?
Even if they are on the path and able to stay the course, they're still going to have naysayers in the organization. But most are still kind of in the, difficult upfront beginning or the messy middle and need the competence to keep going. So another story that we tell in the book that I just love is from this economic forecasting company called Prevedere. And their traditional business model was they would bring in economists to create forecasts for finance departments on both kind of, price of goods, like if it was a food company, what's going to happen to commodity prices, things like that, what might happen with consumer sentiment and willingness to spend. So they create these models for finance departments. And what they first did in their path to productization was they created some software to help their in-house economists create these models faster and more accurately. And then they realized, there is a segment of the marketplace, an actual upmarket segment that has their own economists on staff that might also like to use this software. How might we sell it to them? And what they found was that there was a lot of initial resistance to trade that, high upfront services revenue of we'll create these forecast models for you in exchange for kind of lower upfront software license fees. But their chief product officer just kept continuing and kept the faith. He is now the CEO of the company and got the rest of the organization, to see the genius and the strategy and get the board on board. And so it's a great success story. But it was one that took a lot of time, really had to win the hearts of the rest of the organization, not just their minds, in order to persevere.
kind of feels like it goes back to that point about having a strategy in the first place, right? Like not just trying to make a little sort of quick buck on the side by spinning something up and, just trying to do what you can, but actually to sort of sit there and take the longer view. And it's something that I really liked when I read the Amazon book a little while back, the Working Backwards book, which, is so many of the things in there have kind of become cliches these days with like the way that Amazon works. But the one thing, and it was obvious, but it was good to see it kind of repeated, was this idea that we're in this for the long term. Like we're not going to just sort of prioritize short-term things, and we're not going to be diverted from our long-term vision because we believe in this, and this is why we believe in it, and this is where we're going, and this is what we're doing to get there. And kind of, again, going to that point of like staying the course, right? Like not just being distracted as soon as you hit any kind of difficulty, because there's going to be difficulties, right?
Yeah, excellent point.
But you told me before this that leaders often think that they need help with pricing to get this stuff right, but that you believe that the real challenge is packaging, not pricing at all. So what are some of the problems that you've seen that leaders have with packaging products when they're a professional services company trying to productize?
Yeah. So I think the first one is defaulting to kind of the t-shirt sizing model, like small, medium, large, good, better, best, without actually designing it around customer needs. So the best packages should be designed to target different segments of the marketplace that have different needs. And they may follow something that looks roughly like a small, medium, large, or good, better, best. But there's a very clear starting point around how are the needs different between segment A, B, and C, and then the package is designed with those needs in place. The other thing that I think is really important to get right is to think about what's going to cause someone to migrate from package A, which may be at a smaller price point, to package B, and having a story. So if somebody starts at the smaller price point, package A, that they know, okay, here's how I'll know when I need to get to point B. And again, it sounds very simple when I describe it, but you would be surprised how many packages I go in and look at where they can't articulate how they map to different market segment needs.
So what do they map to then? Do they map to anything? Are they just like a kind of lucky dip or something like that? Like,
yeah,
how
just
do you
price
see
points. Like we just added more. Like, segment A wants the cheapest thing possible. Segment B wants, or segment C wants the most expensive thing. And we just pick something in the middle for the people in between. But there's not, you'd laugh, but it's true.
Yeah, it's kind of a laugh sob at the same time, I think.
A laugh sob? Yeah, because you've seen it as well. Yes.
But it does touch a little bit then on this, and I know you mentioned it in the book as well, this idea about like going into or going away from sales entirely and going maybe more towards product-led growth, which is obviously very on trend these days. That maybe also touches to your earlier point that we just spoke about around kind of the low end offering as well. But that also feels like the thing that maybe is going to be the hardest thing for a service company to go to because they've got no muscles in that area at all. Even outside of the brand recognition and the stuff you talked about earlier, like just the actual talent in the organization to execute something like that. Do you find people trying to do that without that talent, or do they kind of wait and get the talent? Like, how do you see that going?
Yes, they try to do it with the people they have. And I understand why. It's cheaper, right? It is cheaper.
Yeah.
And it seems lower risk, right? Because I'm not committing to extra headcount. I'm going to give somebody a stretch role and ask them to be something they're not. And so the number one thing that I tell leaders when I'm talking about the importance of commercialization is make sure it is properly budgeted for in your business case before you make a go, no-go decision. And that budget needs to include different in-kind capabilities for sales and for marketing. Do not try to do this with the people you have, please.
Well, that's the thing, because you obviously, or certainly I would expect in a services organization for there to be a very different type of marketer, for example, someone that doesn't have product marketing expertise at all. Maybe they're more of a sort of a brand or an SEO marketer or something like that, or obviously doing events and things like that. So like, there's nothing wrong with any of those people, but it does feel, it's just obviously just a factor of the fact that they got the word marketing in their title. And I guess it's the same with salespeople as well. And indeed, anyone in a commercial organization account managers is exactly the same. People that are used to doing things in one way don't necessarily know how to do it a different way. And it doesn't mean that they're stupid. It just means that they've not got any experience. So it
Right.
feels...
Oh, and I was going to say, even if you do have somebody who does have that in their experience, like perhaps they have, sold more productized offerings in the past, you don't want to add this to their existing set of responsibilities. So even if you move them over to sell your more productized approach, you're going to have to backfill. There's still an investment that needs to happen. And what just drives me batty is when there's this assumption that one, people with no experience doing this are going to magically learn how to do it overnight. Or two, even if they do have experience, they're going to do it on top of their existing day job that they already have.
Yeah. Yeah, no. Start to get the old sort of gunshot and cannon noises in the background as the PTSD flares up again. But at the same time, though, when you're talking about packaging and pricing, I mean, obviously you say that packaging is the most important thing, but obviously pricing is still important. And we talked earlier about, whether people are trying to go down market or put it on top or, making sure that they can do recurring revenue and stuff like that. But I get the feeling, and maybe I'm wrong or just sort of extrapolating, but that most people that are, again, not from this world are probably not going to know how to price their stuff very well for kind of recurring revenue and to make sure that they actually capture all of the value that they're actually delivering as well. Probably just go for more of a cost plus type model or just base something, 25% off what they were charging for services. So what's the best way for them to kind of dig into that world of pricing and start to work out what they should really be charging for their product once they've productized it?
Okay. So there are two parts to this. The first one is, how do you get a good base price, your first swag at pricing, that is not based on cost plus? And that is to do some research, again, a week or two of research. It's not months
don't make
and
them
months.
think, come on.
Where you want to find out a couple things. One, what are solutions out there that solve the same problem currently charging? That might give you a sense of a good starting place, right? It's not the only data point you should use, but at least starts to give you some data. Two, what are your customers or prospective customers willing to pay to solve this problem? And you can go ask them, you can survey them. There's some great tools out there that are not that hard to use. You can get them off existing survey tools. You don't need to hire a consulting company to go out and do a $50,000 pricing study for you on this.
But Vecteris are available if required.
Yes. But really, this is not hard. It's not rocket science. And then you look at your costs. So you make sure that you are going to make some profit eventually, right? Probably not in the near term, but eventually, to gut check it. So that's the first part of the response, is do a little bit of research. It's not that hard. This isn't rocket science. There are lots of tools out there to do this. And then you go out and you start testing. And this is the second part. Very rarely, in fact, I would say never, does anyone get pricing right off the bat, especially if you're taking a lean, iterative approach to product development, which you should be. So you have to assume that you're going to continue to evolve your pricing as you get more information from the market. So one, you always want to make clear that this is beta pricing, this is charter pricing, and we're reserving the right to change our pricing. You want to write your contracts so that you've got pricing changes built into them. You want to give yourself a ton of flexibility and set the expectation internally that pricing is iterative. That is the most important part. And really being open to having it be iterative and being disciplined about your tests that you're doing once it is in market. That's the right way to get pricing right. Upfront research gives you a good place to start, but it's not what's going to help you get it right long term. You have to do that by testing and learning.
Yeah, that point around changeable pricing, though, that's something that some people feel very wary of, because they get this feeling that, we're just going to piss off all of our customers or something, and just, how are we ever going to kind of go back from that? And obviously there's things like grandfathering that you can do for that sort of thing, or like you say, just saying the price is subject to change, or just this idea that, prices can go up, and they probably should go up, like everything else is going up these days. But it just feels like one of those things that everyone's often very wary about. And I'm assuming, though, It's almost interesting because there's this idea that productization pushes prices down from the kind of the service level that you had before. But then, people kind of worried that it starts to creep up again. And then how do they differentiate? And then do they have to put the service prices up? And it's just this whole kind of merry-go-round, I guess.
Yeah. And again, I think just you will never have it 100% right, and that's okay. And we have really good language in the book, plus on our website, around how to position pricing as preliminary, what language to use in contracts to give yourself flexibility, and then just continuing to communicate internally that this is iterative. I just had a client last week write me a not very nice email about some pricing that we were testing using a perpetual license, which, could not be a great economic decision. And I said, it was a test. There's one customer we talked to about it, but we wanted to see, how does it change the conversation if we're selling a perpetual license versus a license for a finite period of time? But they were not happy that we had even tested it.
Well,
Okay.
Can't keep everyone happy all the time, right? Speaking of which, you do say in the book that good go-to-market plans and activities include marketing and sales and customer success, which I agree with. But where's the product management team in this? What have you got against us?
Oh, I don't have anything. and in fact, I talk about in the book the importance of finding a product leader who is commercially minded.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, to conceive of and develop initial products when you're still trying to figure out product market fit. Because another big mistake I see organizations make is they assume that a product that still doesn't have, validation of product market fit needs a mature go-to-market function behind it. And it doesn't. If you have a commercially minded product leader, one who can get on and do a pitch to a customer and can then iterate on that pitch based on the feedback they're hearing, you could save a lot of money. I mean, you just have that person do it. And you're going to learn a lot faster. You're going to be more successful. So we talk about what that profile looks like. It's not, the easiest one to find, but it's the best one to find for new products.
Yeah, I think it's critically important, whatever type of company that product leader works in, that they have that kind of commercial business acumen versus just being a kind of a good technical delivery process person. I mean, there's nothing wrong with technical delivery and processes, but it feels like there are too many product people out there, and probably the types that are getting hired by these types of companies are predominantly focusing a lot on just the delivery of the product and not so much the actual whole sort of end to end, where do the ideas come from, all the way through to actual getting it out of the door as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a type that's great for new products, and there's a type that's great for mature products, and the two should not be confused.
No, absolutely. But speaking of product, there's one quote early on in the book, and I know that I posted about it on LinkedIn the other day, and we kind of got a comment back and forth as well. But the quote goes something like this: "Being one of the only product-minded people at my firm is lonely and often thankless. It's a combination of exhaustion, lack of support, and deeper issues of mistrust, coupled with high workload, a lack of autonomy, and others questioning your experience," or expertise, I think. So it's hard out there, and it's definitely hard to be in that position when you're kind of almost like the one person out there trying to sort of fly the flag for productization. And I know that you've talked about this across all of your books, like the necessity to get people in that have experience in this, the necessity to kind of have a culture that supports it, and all of the things that need to be in place. But at the same time, these people can be like a one-person army, or it feels like it from time to time. I guess really the question here is whether there are any ways that you recommend that people can support themselves or survive and thrive within these organizations when they really are that kind of outlier for the rest of the company.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is find a peer group of peers who are working at similar companies that perhaps are not product native, tech native, where you can almost have therapy sessions with each other, group therapy, to just commiserate.
Yep.
Maybe problem solve a little, but just not feel so alone, right? As it says in that quote, it's so lonely. So it's interesting, Jason, we started over 4 years now, when COVID hit, online peer groups for the product leaders that are our clients. And what we quickly realized is that they had a deep psychological need to connect with each other because their jobs were so isolating, because they were the only product-minded people at services organization. So that peer group, I think, is incredibly important. And then the second thing we tell leaders, CEOs, is when you're hiring those product people, that first product hire, ideally get someone who's done this type of transformation before. So don't default to someone who's only worked in product native, tech native companies, because they're going to be miserable.
But it's hard as well, though, because, without, again, wishing to make anyone sound dumb, because that's not the point, but it's not necessarily true that the people that are doing the hiring in these situations have any real understanding of what a good product leader looks like, because they've never worked in a product organization themselves before and they don't really know what to look out for. Now, obviously, you could sit there and, both of us being consultants in our own different markets and stuff, we could sit there and say, I'll get a consultant, which obviously would be one way to pay our bills. But are there ways, or is there like a cheat sheet that people that don't have product expertise can look at to say, okay, well, obviously, yeah, sure, I still don't have all of the knowledge, but at least I know the basic kind of characteristics that I should be looking for?
Yeah. And so we do have that in the book. We talk about the kind of the skills and the experience to look for. I think in Fearless, we also have interview questions, sample case studies, things like that. Using a headhunter, hiring somebody like you to come in and do kind of, a needs assessment and then design the job and then help them interview. I honestly think is the best way to do it, Jason.
Well, I obviously agree, but
yeah. But if that's not in your budget, you could go to our website and get some interview guides and some job descriptions. But
so you're productizing me as you speak.
Yeah.
It's just this.
But this is a big hire, and it's, you're making an investment. You want it to work out. So it might be worth a little bit more money to get somebody to help you with that.
No, 100%. But then speaking about more money, also then if we go back a bit and speak about less money, the idea of how people can use, you sort of touched on it yourself earlier, sort of generative AI in their productization journey as well, and maybe save themselves some of the costs maybe, or save themselves some of the missteps that they can make along the way. How have you seen generative AI being used, not necessarily just to build the products? Obviously, there's things like co-pilots and stuff for coders these days, but like maybe to start to build some of those strategies or to build some of the commercialization plans. Have you seen any success or had any success yourself with that type of approach for LLMs?
Certainly, yeah. And we see product leaders using generative AI tools all the time to help them with kind of a first swag. What we don't see yet is a good way to incorporate differentiated market research into those tools yet.
Oh, synthetic users, it's all the rage, right?
Yeah. So again, it's great for frameworks. It's great to kind of give you a base level. But if you want something that's truly, a commercialization strategy that's truly differentiated, you are going to have to go out and do some of your own primary research. Again, surveys, interviews, looking at usage data of existing products and services, and then use that to finish your strategy.
Yeah, it's always good for a draft, but yeah, I definitely wouldn't want to see someone put a whole strategy through and then just execute that strategy without thinking about it. Although I actually kind of do want to see that just to see what happens, but I don't imagine that the result will be too pretty. So we've covered productizing stuff, we've covered being fearless about it, we've covered now commercializing stuff as well. So I guess the only question now is, when's the next book, and what's it going to be about?
I don't have one. Jason, do you have any good ideas? Because I will say we have 4 colors in our scheme of our I'll show you just right. So we did navy for the first one.
Original blue.
Right. And it had like the white, the light blue, and the orange. So then the next one we did the white.
Yep.
And now we have the beautiful orange.
Yep.
So we still have this light blue color.
Oh, there's one left in the locker.
Yeah.
But what could it be?
What hot topics are you hearing?
What hot topics am I hearing? I think, to be honest, a lot of the hot topics that I'm hearing, and certainly a lot of the stuff that I spend my time thinking about and talking about these days, is around some of the stuff that we talked about tonight. So, for example, around sales strategy, or like how to kind of get to grips with the sales cycle for products, even, in an actual product company versus a kind of transforming one. And just the general idea of kind of, I guess, maybe something that what could be worth talking about, sort of alignment between teams, and actually making sure that, kind of going back to our earlier point around like, well, what if you've got this one team that's being incented in one way, or this other team that's trying to do it another way? And even the best, even with the best will in the world, they're going to be kind of butting heads from time to time, and maybe even going after the same customers. And I've absolutely seen that before as well, where you've got like the product people and the services people trying to basically outsell each other to the same, target client. So maybe there's an alignment book that you can have there as well, which can kind of use the last color up. I don't know.
Awesome.
We'll talk about
Thank
it afterwards.
You. Okay. Sounds great. Thank you.
Or maybe it could just be about, mountain climbing and the kind of analogies that you can draw from that to the kind of the torturous journey of ascending to the summit of your kind of commercial success. Who knows?
There you go.
Work something out.
Yeah.
But while you're writing that, or while you're thinking about writing that, where can people find you after this if they want to chat about the stuff they've heard tonight, or find out about your company, find out about your books, or see if they can borrow any ice axes?
So 2 ways. Our website is vecteris.com. That's VECTERIS.com. And then LinkedIn. Love to connect with people on LinkedIn. Just include in your connection requests that you heard me on the podcast.
No, absolutely. Although these days you only get 5 personalized connection requests a month. So use them wisely. But however they get across, I'll make sure to put that all into the show notes. Hopefully you get a few people heading in your general direction. Well, 3rd time's a charm. And obviously, Eisha, great to chat as always. Obviously wishing you every success for the book. But as for now, thanks for taking the time.
Oh, thank you, Jason. It's my pleasure.